Assalamu alaikum, dear friends and participants. Welcome to the sixth session of our Quran for Teens class. I hope you are enjoying the series that we have started, and as I always say, the purpose is that you are able to think more deeply on the scripture that you might have been studying ever since your childhood and go deeper into the meanings and not only understand the Quran but also try to implement what it says in your lives as well. And at the same time, the purpose is that any question that you might have regarding religion or the passage that we discuss in each session should be frankly discussed. The purpose is to initiate any uninhibited dialogue between ourselves, to educate ourselves, to learn from each other. Remember, all of us, we learn from each other, in spite of the fact that I'm your teacher, but to be honest, I do learn in every session from you because there are so many things which we call as common wisdom or wisdom that people have, even if they are not formally educated in a very advanced way. But still, there are so many things which humanity as a whole in their experience can share. So it's a learning experience for all of us. So let's try to make the best out of it and try to understand the Quran as deeply as we can. And at the same time, whenever there is a discussion, we speak out our minds. We don't withhold any questions that we have, because this is how frank discussion should progress, and this is how I believe we do when we are studying other subjects. After all, in our social sciences class, in our arts class, in our mathematics class, in our sciences class, we freely discuss a lot of issues with our instructors and teachers. So this dialogue has to be initiated in religion as well, and there's no such thing as a taboo subject or a subject that cannot be touched upon. Every single thing that comes to your mind, it could be very basic, it could be skeptic sort of a thing, which you find it hard to believe. So all these things can be brought up into discussion. So without further ado, I'll just introduce the passage that we are going to study today. And this passage, dear participants and friends, as you can see, relates to our everyday behavior, especially because we know that whenever we speak, there is something that we have to say that can affect either in the positive way or in the negative way people who come into our interaction. So it is extremely important that we are able to think before we speak. And the famous old saying which says that look before you leap is also equally true, to think before you speak. So thinking before speaking, because one small sentence can hurt a person, and one smile or maybe a single sentence can make the day of a person. So such are the stakes which are involved. So today's excerpts are selected from a surah of the Quran which is called Surah Al-Hujurat, and this is the 49th surah of the Quran. And the background of this surah is that people who were not living in the company of the Prophet and they had become new Muslims as a result of the growing force of Islam, while seeing this religion grow, it was as if they were overawed. And Iman, as the surah calls, as stresses, that had not really entered their hearts, and they had basically professed Islam once they saw its growing power. So it's more out of awe and majesty of the religion that made them accept Islam, and it was less understanding that was involved. And these were the Bedouins of the suburbs of Medina who had accepted faith, and they lacked in a lot of good conduct and a lot of things in which they need to be instructed. So in the beginning of the surah, they have been told that if someone who comes to you with a news, and that news is of far-reaching consequences, so don't just believe that person, especially if he's a person who is a fasik, as the Quran says, who's a person who doesn't have a good conduct, unless the news is thoroughly checked, unless you investigate. So just don't accept people on their face unless you are able to see what they are actually saying, and for this you have to investigate and evaluate whatever they have brought to you. And then the surah goes on to tell us that if there is a difference of opinion between Muslims, and this goes to the effect, I mean, it goes as far as two Muslim groups, or in our modern terminology, maybe two Muslim countries picking up arms against each other, fighting against each other, then has to be some third party who try to inculcate sense in them and let sanity prevail by perhaps by actually mediating between the two countries. And if that mediation does lead to an armed conflict, then that too could be a possibility, of course, thinking or considering the fact that all diplomatic ties also fail in this regard. And then finally, in the third section, we have these verses which I'm now going to read out before you. These verses again have those Bedouins and those weak Muslims in mind, or who had accepted faith and they had not fully been instructed and educated. So they are being told that there are certain things that they do which include loose talk, which include some mannerisms which have to be set right, and therefore they must pay attention to this, because being a Muslim community, being a polity, or someone in which you are living as a community, whatever you say can badly affect the other people. So I'm just going to read out the Arabic text before you, and then of course you can translate. So the words are: Ya ayyuhallazina amanu la yaskhar qawmun min qawmin asa an yakunu khayran minhum wala nisa'un min nisa'in asa an yakunna khayran minhunna wala talmizu anfusakum wala tanabazu bil alqab bi'sal ismul fusuqu ba'da al iman wa man lam yatub fa ulaika humuz zalimun. And then the next verse says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu ijtanibu kathiran min adh-dhann inna ba'da adh-dhanni ismun wa la tajassasu wa la yaghtab ba'dukum ba'da ayuhibbu ahadukum an ya'kula lahma akhihi maytan fakarihtumuh wattaqullah innallaha tawwabur rahim. And then the last verse of this section, which is the 13th verse, it says, Ya ayyuhan nas inna khalaqnakum min zakarin wa untha وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. So these are the verses, and I do make it a point to read them out in Arabic, and I would also urge you to polish up your Arabic reading skills so that you can maybe you're able to fluently read, as well as maybe memorize, if possible, some of these verses. And when you're doing your prayer, when you're offering the prayer, it will be a chance for you to actually say out these verses when you're reading the prayer, and this of course will add a lot of concentration to the prayer as well. So can I ask Sana Iqbal that you could please read out verse 11.
Believers, let not one group of men make fun of another. It is possible that they may fare better than them, and let not women make fun of other women who may perhaps turn out to be better than themselves.
And please continue.
And do not defame one another, nor call one another by bad names. Even the name of defiance is bad after faith, and those who do not repent, and the ones who are unjust to themselves.
Oh, thank you for that, Sana. So I now request Maria Iqbal.
Believers avoid being overly speculative, for some speculations are a blatant sin, and do not pry on one another. And no one among you should indulge in backbiting others. Would any of you like to eat the flesh of his dead brother? So you regarded this to be abhorrent, and keep fearing God. Indeed, God is ever inclined to accepting repentance, and is ever merciful.
Thank you for that, Maria. And the 13th verse, Fatima Hussain, can I please request you to read it? Read the translation.
People, we have created you from one man and one woman, and divided you into tribes and clans, that you may get to know one another. The noblest of you in God's sight is He who is the most God-conscious. Indeed, God is all-knowing and wise.
So thank you very much for that, Fatima. So you can clearly see these three verses. They have a strong message for us, and as I just explained, although they have occurred in the context that those Muslims who had accepted Islam by seeing its force spreading all over Arabia, they were instructed that they must have this very congenial conduct. But you can see, and I think you would agree that all this is something which is even more needed today, because the things that these verses mention that we should abstain from, and some of the things that it says that we should adopt, are universal things. And so therefore I will now come to the comprehension part. And the comprehension part, you can see, is pretty simple. And if you just go through these translations one again, you have them with you. So the first comprehension question, as you can see, is that make a list of the wrongs which these verses discuss. So there are certain things which these from. So I would ask each one of you to either do it in the form of a mental note, or maybe write it down on your computers, or on a piece of paper, and then we'll discuss them. So please begin now. In case you find any word difficult in the translation, just let me know. I'll try to explain it as well, but you just need to make a list of those wrongs.
Hi, I have a question. In the first paragraph, there's this line that says, even the name of defiance is bad after faith.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that even the word, when there are certain things that are bad as they are, but even taking the name of that bad thing is not good. So it's like expressing something in extreme. Well, for example, when I say that don't disobey your parents, or don't be mean to your parents. So, and I can go on and stress that even the word meanness is not a good word. So one is the act of meanness, and the other thing is the word itself. So it's just an emphasis which is being added, that even the word defiance is something which is bad. One thing is the act of defiance, and one thing is the word which describes that act. So even the word, so it's like an extra emphasis which is being added. So let me start off with Huzaifa. Huzaifa, could you just read out the list that you have made?
Yes, it comes that don't make fun of another, and avoid being overly speculative, and do not backbite others, and don't insult each other based on your clans.
Have you, gone through the verses, all of them? Don't you think you've missed some of the things? Could you just please go through them again? Because I think you have some things which you have missed out, and maybe you can just carefully read the sentence one by one, or just break it up in parts. Okay. In the meantime, I'll ask Fatima and Ariba, either of you or both of you.
Do not make fun of each other. Do not defame each other. Do not call one another by bad names. Avoid being overly speculative. Do not backbite.
Okay. And what about don't you think you've missed one thing? Just one small thing?
Do not pry on one another. Is that
right?
The one that we missed?
Yeah. So prying, of course, means to spy on other people and to try to find out their faults, that you try to search for their any shortcoming that might have. And the purpose of this prying and spying is to demean the other person. So yes, thank you for that. Okay, Musa and Ramla.
Do not make fun of one another. Do not defame or insult. Avoid being speculative, as in do not assume things that you do not completely understand. Do not backbite, and do not pry in another's circumstances.
Okay, thank you for that, Musa. And Nida Aziz, so what's the list that you've made?
Don't make fun of others. Do not defame one another. Do not call others bad names. Do not make blatant speculation. No backbiting, and do not pry about others.
Okay, so that is wonderful. And Ali, could you please share your wisdom with us?
Do not make fun of one another. Do not defame one another. Nor call one another by bad names.
avoid being overly speculative, don't backbite, and don't pry.
And don't fry. Okay, so the point was that, of course, these are some of the social evils, some of the loose talk that we do, and some of the unbecoming conduct that we are at times guilty of. So now you have just seen some of these words, I would say, or these titles. And now we need to go slightly deeper so that we can discuss each of them a little more specifically, so that we are able to catch anything which is more deeper than what appears on the surface. So the first thing that comes to my mind, and I'd like one of you to answer maybe, or present your opinion. You can clearly see that there is a distinction found in the first thing that is mentioned with the rest of the things, and that particular distinction is that men and women both have been mentioned. So the words are la yaskhar qawmun min qawmin, and la yaskhar, in parallel it says that women also must not do this. But in the rest of the directives we just have a singular gender, which of course covers both, but they are not specified. So what do you think is the reason that this first directive, which says that don't make fun of each other, it specifically addresses both men and women? Because as you can see, the rest of the directives also, they address men and women, but they don't single them out, they don't name them, and they just tell us as a directive. So any particular reason that comes to your mind that this first don't that we have been stopped from doing actually has a mention of both men and women?
I think it might be because men make more fun of other men while women make fun of other women. So it's kind of addressing that directly.
Okay, so you think that the reason that the first of them specifies men and women is that this is something which they indulge in much more, and men making fun of men and women making fun of women. So that is why the Quran has actually stressed. So could you say that this is because this is something which is much more rampant than the rest of the evils that have been discussed, and something which when we get together and we crack jokes? So you see, one thing is to crack jokes, and which are also of course in good faith, but another thing is when you are laughing at someone who actually is, the purpose is to demean that person, or to belittle him, or to think that as if he is a lesser person than you, he is inferior to you. And perhaps this goes on between men and women amongst themselves. But what about, there is one category which this verse perhaps does not mention, because it mentions men making fun of men and women making fun of women. But what about men making fun of women, or vice versa, that women making fun of men? Apparently this is not discussed here. So what do you think is the reason for that? Why is it that just men amongst themselves are singled out and women amongst themselves, and it's not the other way in which there is a cross-gender exchange? So should we think that men don't make fun of women as a result, or women don't make fun of men? Is that so? Is that the reason? Or is it the fact that maybe men make fun of men, this instance is much more than maybe men making fun of women, or vice versa?
The second thing that you said, men make fun of other men more than they make fun of women.
Okay, so this is Fatima.
Yeah.
Okay, so you think that the reason is that men make fun of men much more, and similarly, would you think that women make fun of fellow women much more than they make fun of men? Is that so?
Yeah.
Okay, so one reason could be that singling out men and women in this way is that this is much more rampant in their own genders. And there is another thing which this verse mentions, and it actually mentions the reason why you should not make fun of the other person. So any one of you who can come up with the reason which these verses actually explicitly mention, that why should this not be done?
I think it's because
Yes.
Men to men and women to women are more competitive because they want to be the better girl or boy, and that's why they like talk about each other more to make themselves feel better and more powerful.
So this is something that you have derived, and this could be true. But I'm looking for something which is mentioned by the Quran in those verses. Just read them. It says that men should not make fun of men. Why? What is the next sentence?
Who may perhaps turn out to be better than themselves.
Yeah, that's it. So what does that mean actually?
That they shouldn't talk bad about the women or men that are better than them because they feel threatened.
So what does better here mean? And I mean, what is they are better in front of who? And how do you know that someone is better?
You might feel insecure around them.
They could have more money.
So who's that? Is that Ryan?
Yeah.
So the reason is that they could have more money.
Yeah, they could be more privileged.
So what would the verse mean? Does it say that you should not make fun of other men because the people that you make fun of, they have more money than the person who is making fun?
I think it could also mean that maybe Muslims should not make fun of non-Muslims, maybe, because you never know in the future, maybe they could themselves be Muslims that would believe more in Allah than you do.
Okay, so this is one aspect, but you see, remember the verse is talking to, I mean, each one of us, regardless whether we are Muslims or non-Muslims. So the verse says that men should not make fun of men and women should not make fun of women, and both verses actually tell a reason. Come on, guys, you have to come up with a reason. And you were very close there, Nida, I think, but just read those verses once again, and the reason is right there. And you did point it out, but it needs to be a little more comprehensive.
I think it's because they may be better than their own self for making fun of others.
Right. So what does that mean? I mean, they are better in the eyes of God? Is that so?
Yeah, I think from like religion, stuff like that.
Right. So that is the reason actually. You see, the words say that don't make fun, men should not make fun of other men because those other men can in fact be better than those person that you're making fun of. I mean, the person who's making fun of is making fun of the other person because he or she would think that he is someone who is insignificant or who actually has some weakness, and therefore it is generally the weaknesses that make us laugh at other people. And what we do is we look at the apparent form of a person. And here the verse is telling us, both men and is telling both men and women, that on the one hand you're making fun of another person, and you're thinking that he is lesser than you, he's inferior to you, and you might not be knowing that on the one hand you think that that person is inferior, but in the eyes of God, he or she is a much better person than you. After all, you've just picked up one shortcoming, maybe one weakness, and started to play upon that and started to, emphasize that much more. But the people that you make fun of might be easily better in their own character, because a person is what he is from his inside or her inside. And when you make fun of other people, you are mostly looking at things which are apparent, some of the character traits which are apparent, which are more prominent, and you're not going deep into the personality. So I think this is a very important point that all of us need to understand and note, that when you make fun of someone, always think that you might be making fun of someone who's much better than you, in fact, as a human being, as a person. And this would then amount to a lot of arrogance. But because arrogance is something in which you think that you are superior and the other person is inferior, whereas it's perhaps the reverse. That person has much more superiority vis-a-vis some of the human traits are concerned. So this is an important thing which this verse has actually tried to emphasize and stress. And but by the way, we need to keep reminding ourselves that cracking jokes or I mean, doing this, even some of the loose talk. This is quite okay in certain situations because this is done in good faith. You are just in a light mood, but your own conscience will tell you when you are crossing the limits, when you're making fun of the other person, when you're jeering at the other person, when you are demeaning the other person. So this is the boundary that we must not cross. The point that I'm making here is that being light-hearted, cracking jokes, doing these things is not prohibited per se. It is only when it starts to cross limits, and it's like making fun of the other person, and all of us know what making fun is, that we need to stop here, because it is here that you are treading on uncharted territory. You're treading on areas in which you might, or of course this is something that's bound to take place, is that you might hurt the other person. So it is of utmost importance that our words should not hurt any other person, because you see, this is, as you must have heard, that the tongue, that the wound of the tongue is much more deeper than the wound caused by a sword. So when you say something from your mouth and your tongues, it stays in the heart of the other people. And remember, imagine yourself in that person's place, how wounded you would be from inside. So I think this is one thing that we need to be very careful of. And again, this is regardless of age. This happens when we are sitting, we are chatting and gossiping. So in all these instances, let us be extra careful, let us be more vigilant in these conversations. So thank you for this input. Let's move on to the next part. So it starts off with, we just said that we must not make fun of the other person, and men and women both have been singled out. And then it says, do not defame one another or call one another with bad names. So what do you understand by these two words, that don't defame? I mean, let me just explain this as the word says, that لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا منهم ولا نساء من نساء عسى أن يكن خيرا منها ولا تلمزوا. So the word is lamaza, talmizu, and talmizu means that you are sarcastic, you start to be overly blameworthy of other people, you try to defame them, you bring them into disrepute, and this is something that I think happens very much because of the fact that we are not very careful in our conversation. And the next thing, of course, is that you don't call each other by bad names. So I'll just take some time out here and like to discuss these two things with you, that defaming other people and making fun of them. Anyone who would like to give their input regarding these two things, especially when we keep names of other people. You see, the words are that you don't the Arabic names are la tanabazu bil alqab, which mean that you don't give other people bad names. I mean, all of us know what these bad names are. We call them, we make these give them these titles, and this is particularly true. And I profess as the person that we used to make fun of our teachers when we were growing up, and we used to give them all sorts of bad names, and I'm really ashamed of that, of course. But again, this is how we have to learn and realize that giving bad names, whether it's to our juniors, to our colleagues, or to our teachers, or to anyone, is not something which is worthwhile. So anyone of you who would like to share anything in this regard, or any particular thing that you might feel that you have been a victim of, even if you'd like to share that other people have called you by certain names and you have felt very bad about it, any experience that you'd like to share, that would be a very good learning experience for all of us. Okay, let me make it even more easier. So how many of us have been, let's say, guilty of calling bad names to our friends? So one thing is that you call them with a certain name and it's in good faith and you just laugh it out. And the other thing is, you know that this has a pinch of salt in it. It really hurts the other person. So I think it is here that we need to be very careful. There are certain things that are acceptable and there are certain things which are not. So it's not a complete embargo, it's not a complete prohibition, it's just that we need to realize that we must not cross the limits. So any particular name that comes to your mind could be an offensive thing, So, okay, let me just point this out, that all of us are so very sensitive regarding racial slurs. So, giving bad names, for example, uh, is one application of that, is these racial remarks that we give regarding color, regarding creed, regarding religion. I mean, it could be any distinction. So, anything that comes to your mind in this, that there's a particular racial slur that you would think is very common today, and that needs to be done away with? Okay, let me ask you this. So, those of you living in the United States, or maybe if they even if they're not living there, they must have heard this a lot of times in, studied this in history, that the word Red Indian, I'm sure you must have heard about that, Red Indian, the word Red Indian. So, if you study and go deeper, you'll find that this is an offensive name. And just Google this word, and you'll find out that the reason that this name was given to them, the Red Indians do not actually like this name, that they be given this name, and they prefer to be called Native Americans. So, because of the fact that they inhabited the United States before it was discovered, and Columbus, who actually thought that he had sailed to India, and therefore he called it Indies. So, and they called the inhabitants as Indians. So, they of course take strong offense to this, and they would not like to be called Red Indians, and for them the right name would be Native Americans. And if any one of you has more interest on what happened to these Native Americans and how they were brushed out of the United States or even marginalized, and they are really a community in stress and distress. So there's a very beautiful documentary on Netflix regarding these Native Americans and how they, in the last 300 years, have been totally wiped out or marginalized, and the way they would have been expected to be dealt with, that never happened. So this is one thing which we often do. And then again, our own in our own Asian countries, we'll find there are other areas in which there are people who are called the untouchables. So look at the people who are called Shudras in India. I'm sure some of you might be aware of them. So they are called the untouchables because they are simply untouchable. People of other castes, they are not allowed to even touch them, come close to them, or intermarry with them. They have separate communities. And a similar thing, of course, happened in the Holocaust. All of you know this very well, that the Aryan race was considered to be superior by Hitler and his henchmen to the Semitic races. So this is again a slur, a racial slur. But again, as I said, this is a widely understood thing. And lesser than that, there are things that we call our friends, our neighbors, people who are our younger brothers and sisters, that we should avoid, because we have to imagine ourselves in their place and think that if someone calls us by these names, and more often than not, these names actually, they depict certain handicaps that the person might have. For example, he could be a short-heighted person, and you call him by a name that actually refers to this short height. Or a person who could have a certain color, and you call that person by a certain name. So remember, these things are something that you cannot help. Your color, your height, your physical attributes, they are given to you by God. And if you make fun of such people, then ultimately it amounts to making fun of God's scheme, because a person could not have helped himself having a certain color or maybe a certain country that he was born in. So this is God's scheme, and anything we do to actually challenge that scheme it's really bad of us, and let's be very careful in that. So I think these are the two areas that again we have to be very careful of, not defame other people, not start blaming them, and again, as I said, that not call them by all sorts of names which are offensive. And anytime during this talk, if anyone would like to share anything of any personal anecdote, or maybe something which happened to you as a victim, or maybe if you victimize some other people, we are most welcome to share it in a very frank way, and the purpose is to learn from each other. Okay, until that happens, let's go on to the next part, or some of the next things which have been mentioned in this verse. So it says that, yes, the last of these says that even the name of defiance is bad in faith. So, as someone just asked, it says that when you do something bad, for example, if you backbite, for example, if you abuse, so it's like saying, well, even the name of this stinks. Even talking bad is one thing, and to talk bad itself stinks. So it's like emphasizing the fact when something is really bad, even the title of that act is something that we would not like. And this is how God has explained it to us. And we now go on to the next verse. Okay, so it says, believers avoid being overly speculative, for some speculations are a blatant sin. Okay, so guys, what do you think that this verse actually means? Anything that comes to your mind, that what exactly is this the fact that you are being overly speculative? Any example that comes to your mind, or any application of being speculative? You know what speculation is. Speculation is that you conjecture, you make a rough estimate, and the purpose here is to find out what's going on in other people's lives or in in societies, so that you are able to be happy that someone is either suffering, maybe not exactly suffering, but the fact that you think that there is this lack of information about you, and instead of finding out the exact information, you just speculate and you say, well, that person might have grown rich because he's taken bribes, and well, he would have gone to that university because his father was influential. So these are the things that we call as being speculative, overly speculative, in which we don't have the information, we don't have concrete facts. What we are doing is it's like fantasy, it's like fantasizing certain things about certain people and then talking about them, and without even being responsible enough to investigate whether these things are correct. You sit in a company of people in a gathering and you say, well, that person was successful because of the influence of his father or mother. So these are the things that are here meant to be stopped by us, stopped by the Quran, that we do them. And here there could be an exception that we might discuss, and that is that when you're talking about the speculation, there are areas in which the speculation, I mean, the verse does not say that you don't speculate badly about people, don't be ill in your speculation. This is not what the verse says. It says, do not indulge in too much speculation. Inna ba'da zanni ismun, because there are certain speculations that will lead you to sin. So it's not that evil speculations are being stopped from, it is being overly speculative. Instead of basing your life on facts, instead of finding out what the exact truth is, you're just conjecturing. And this is the thing that goes on unchecked. This is the age of social media, and we see that there are so many pieces of news which just float around, and just after an hour or so we find that they were just rumors. They were baseless things because people were just making all sorts of estimations, and as a result of these estimations, what you do is you actually at the end of the day end up damaging the reputation of someone. Because you see, you've got unresearched facts, you start talking about those unresearched facts in front of other people, and the other people form an opinion on the basis of those unresearched facts, and then this starts a chain reaction. It's like a dominoes effect, and this piece of news starts to travel, and before you know it, it spreads like wildfire. And it's so damaging, and imagine that you yourself were in this place. So to be speculative, to be always on the lookout that what other people are doing, and without investigating what they are doing, this is something which is, of course, absolutely wrong of us, and all of us need to be extra careful. And you can see the next part of this verse, when it says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu ijtanibu kaseeran min az-zann inna ba'da zanni ismun wala tajassasu. So the next word that it says is that don't pry on other people, don't spy on them. And here again, the meaning of prying and spying is that you are, after finding some faults, some blemishes, some bad habits of people, and you are interested in making a list of them. Again, this is a form of arrogance. You see, arrogance is that you feel yourself to be elevated. You feel yourself that when other people have lesser abilities than you, or they have certain shortcomings, it gives us at times this pleasure that okay, we are superior to them. So it says that you must not pry or you should not live on this prying in which you are speculative. Again, this is a form of speculation in which the purpose is just to find out the evil or the bad habits of a person. You're not after his good habits, because you see, all of us have good habits and all of us have bad habits. So a good person is someone who is always trying to encourage the good habits that other people have and downplay the bad habits. But this is the reverse, and the reverse is that instead of finding out the good habits, you go after those bad habits and make an issue out of them. You spread them in the society, because you see, if you want to reform a person, it's not a good thing to start spreading his mistakes, because in that case there's little chance left for him to reform, because he would become reactionary, he could become a reactionary, and all the things that you wanted should not happen would start to happen. So I am explaining these things myself, taking this, assuming that you would agree. And of course, if there is any question that you would like to ask regarding these evils, because these are self-evident evils, these are self-evident mistakes that we do. Yes, I would like to have your opinion now on the last of these things, which is mentioned here, and that is backbiting. So, what do you think is exactly the meaning of backbiting?
And like talk about someone present, like with your friends or something, like talk like rude about them.
Yes, and you should. There's just one thing that you need to add, that you're talking about someone's bad habits in his absentia or her absentia, when he or she is not present, and the purpose is to demean that person. I mean, you have this special intention that there is a person who has something bad in him or her. Of course, this is something, you're not blaming someone of something which he or she does not have. Well, she has that shortcoming or he has that shortcoming, and you are mentioning that shortcoming not for the purpose of reforming that person, because there is this case also that you talk about someone when they are not present, but the purpose of your talk is not to demean that person, but maybe you have a plan to set it right. Maybe you are talking to a friend, well, this is, and you're saying, well, such and such a person has these shortcomings, and I as a friend would like to help him or her overcome them, and you're discussing this with another friend of yours. Well, that person is not present, so that would not be counted as backbiting, because backbiting is that you talk about someone in his or her absence, and the way that you talk about is that you actually intend to demean that person, to bring him into a certain disrepute, and you would like his reputation or her reputation to suffer because of that bad habit, and because of the fact that he or she is not there amongst you. What happens is that he or she cannot defend herself or himself, because you see, when you're doing something, you're saying something in absentia, you're not giving a chance to the other person to reply or respond. Had he or she been present, maybe what you talked about regarding him or her would have been absolutely different, because at times your information is not correct. At times, if the information is correct, you exaggerate. At times you misstate. So these are all the possibilities, and if that other person is present, he or she could have easily responded, so that the actual thing which was there could have been thrashed out. And that is why the Quran says that this is like eating the meat of your dead brother, which is of course a heinous thing. You just cannot imagine. I mean, eating the meat of a dead person is like cannibalism. You would detest that. And if that is not just of any person, it is of your own brother, that is even more unthinkable. So this is how the Quran says what evil backbiting is, that it's like eating the meat of your dead brother. So, and as I said, this again is something that we have to be very careful about, because as human beings, this is our weakness, that we discuss people in absentia, and when we discuss people in absentia, we really cross the limits, and this is so common. So the purpose is to revisit our conversations, to revisit all these things that might be coming out of us, because remember, our aim is to become good human beings first. And a good human being is a person who does not make fun of other people, who does not call other people by bad names, who does not pry on other people, who is not overly speculative, who is, of course, someone who would not backbite. So all these things that we've just discussed are meant that we stop them and enter into a new world in which we are people who can be called as good human beings. So thank you very much for your participation. And now I'll move on to the second question, and mention 5 wrongs that we commit through the tongue. I mean, when we see something, we say something which is bad. So these are some of the 5 things that, 5 very prominent things. Some of the things that you have already discussed or read in this passage, and there could be other things as well. So take just about 3 or 4 minutes, just think, and let's then have a short discussion on the list that you have made. So think about the 5 wrongs that come out of your tongue and that you'd like to avoid.
Insulting, backbiting.
Remember, you have to add something which is not mentioned in these verses.
Judging, swearing, defaming, accusing.
Right? Judging, defaming, accusing, defaming, judging people, accusing people, defaming them, right? Okay, that's a good one. This is a good addition. Let me ask Nida. Yeah.
Lying?
Mm-hmm.
Lying or being vulgar or maybe being rude to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Spreading propaganda about people.
Right, propaganda. Okay, Fatima and Ariba, what can you add to this list?
Lying, manipulating, shouting or talking in disrespectful manner, swearing and accusing falsely.
Wow, that's a good one. Thank you for that. And what about Sana? Can you add something more to this?
Teasing, swearing, calling names, talking behind people's backs, lying, and being nosy about someone else's behavior.
Okay, that's pretty good. So it's like abusing, lying, misreporting, wrongly blaming, as you said, vulgarity, vulgar talk. What about bearing false oaths or bearing false witness? Then you show off yourself and you talk in a manner that you try to, again, be arrogant. So that's another thing. Idle talk is also something. It's like frivolous talking and gossiping and about flattery, and of course talking too much. That's again, if you're called a chatterbox or a person who is incessantly talking, that's also not a good thing. You are at times underestimating, you're at times exaggerating, and then you're at times what you do is you divulge secrets which other people have confided in you. So you see, you are friends and friends confide with one another, but sometimes they don't honor this confidentiality, and they actually reveal those secrets. So that's also not a good thing as a friend. Again, breaking promises is something that should be avoided. Defrauding others, discouraging. This is something that we do a lot. We criticize people, and we go at such lengths in criticizing them that they get discouraged and they feel that as if they are good for nothing. So remember, if you have to discourage any person from anything that he or she might be doing wrongly, be very polite and be very tactful, because you see, a few words of discouragement can really put a person out as far as his or her abilities are concerned. So maybe if you had used some polite words, some gentle words, that person would have understood and he could have rectified whatever was wrong with him. But strong words of discouragement, they take away from a person whatever little that he or she might be having. So positively, you have to encourage people, and remember, the opposite of this is to appreciate people. So instead of discouraging them, always appreciate people. Even if you find a very small thing that a person might be having as a positive trait, make it a point to give it words. Appreciate other people as much as you can. Tell them what good influence they've had in your life, how positively they are affected, because this is which will really help them, and you'll receive the same from the other people, from other people as well. So thank you very much. This is a very important area that we all need to be very, very careful of, and I do think that all these things that you have pointed out will really help us as we resume our lives and as we go back to our own friends. So okay, let's move on to the third comprehension question, which is that what exactly is the message? Remember, we have till now discussed the two passages, I mean two verses, the verse 11 and verse 12. There is a verse 13 which is a slightly different verse. It does not mention any wrongs that the previous two verses did so. It has a very important message to give. Just take some time and read the translation once again, and then we'll see what exactly is the message that this verse is so strongly giving out. Okay, can I ask Fatima Hussain? Fatima Hussain, what do you think is the message of this verse? Yes?
We're descended from one woman and one man, and rest of us are who are the most God conscious, most God fearing, who keep in mind that God is always watching us.
Okay, let's see what others have to say. What about Waji? Waji, what do you think is the message of this verse?
I think the message on this verse is that Allah has created human beings and divided them, man and woman, into tribes because they want each one of them to know each other, so they can get along better with each other. So,
Okay, fair enough. Yes.
So they can be allies with each other and not fight among us.
Right.
Among them.
Okay, Muhammad, what do you make out of it? Yeah.
I think it means to not judge any specific person by their caste.
Okay. What about Ahsan?
I think that this verse is talking about like people don't have like every person is the same. I don't know.
Concentrate on the translation. You're bound to pick up the message if you just concentrate. You see, there is this thing that God says that He has created mankind from a single pair of man and woman. It does not say, the verse does not start off with believers. The first thing that you need to note is that the previous verses was starting off with Muslims. It was telling us, oh believers. But here, the first thing that you need to note is there is a shift, and it says, oh mankind. It's not just the believers who are being addressed here. It starts off by addressing mankind. Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min zakarin wa unsa. So, O mankind, we have created you from a single parent. So this is how the verse starts off. And then it says certain things. Okay, let's move ahead. Okay, Nida Aziz, what do you think?
I think it means that doesn't matter what race you are or what color is your skin, you're all equal in the eyes of Allah, and what distinguishes one person from another is their taqwa or their belief in Allah.
Okay, thank you for that. Amma and Ariba.
I think the verse is telling us that diversity makes us more knowledgeable and it shouldn't divide us. We should respect each other despite our differences because we come from the same source. How it said one man and one woman. Therefore, we're the same and we shouldn't treat each other differently.
And there's one more thing left. Although we should not treat each other differently, although we have been divided into groups, this division is not for the sake of superiority or inferiority. It is just a means of recognition. It's just a means of that you are a different person than the other and you recognize them. So therefore, it's not this recognition or this division into various tribes or families or races that should be a cause of any superiority. If there is anyone superior, he is the one who, what does the verse say? Superiority does not hinge on...
He's God conscious.
God consciousness, that's correct. So the real thing which makes a person superior is not that he or she is born of a certain race or a certain creed or he has a certain color, belongs to a certain country or a certain lineage. No, that's not the case. But it is basically his or her taqwa, as the Quranic verse, the actual word is taqwa, and taqwa means to be able to abide by the limits of God. If you look at the literal meaning of taqwa, it means to abide by the limits of God, and that is also the same thing as being conscious of what God tells us to do. So God consciousness is actually something which tells us that there are certain limits that we should not cross. So the more we are conscious about God, the more we will be careful in not crossing those limits. So I think this is it's a sublime message, and this message actually stands at one of the root messages or the basic messages which the Quran tells us, and that is, as human beings, there are certain things that we cannot change. We cannot change our parents, we cannot change our country, we cannot change our color, we cannot change our tribe, family, etc. But the thing that we can change in us, which we have power of, which we are capable of, is the person inside us. We cannot change the person outside us, because that is how God has selected us to be. But the inside person, he or she can be a better person, and the more you are, the more God conscious you are. So to be compassionate, to be kind, to be generous, to be selfless, to be looking after other people's needs, to be always on the lookout, to be generous and charitable. So these are the things which make you closer to God, that make you being more conscious of God. And look what the verse says, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. It is not the people of a certain race who are superior. The people who are God conscious, they are the ones who are closer to God, who God will regard as superior in his eyes. So it's a very strong message, and I think that this is one of the areas that the message of the Quran has to be put out to all humanity. Remember, the Quran is not just for Muslims, it is for humanity. And this verse starts off by these words, Ya ayyuhan nas, O mankind. And when it starts in this manner, particularly in this format, it has this universal appeal. And I think that as you interact with your friends who are non-Muslims, some of the verses that you can really talk about them are the verses that we studied today regarding bad behavior and loose talk. You can see that this is something which is acknowledged by all human beings. This is not just the Quran who is pointing out that speculation or bad speculation is a bad thing, or making fun of is a bad thing. These are universal evils. The Quran is just trying to remind us what we already know. So this is something of a universal message that you can talk about, discuss with your non-Muslim friends when they want to know what the Quran is all about, and especially the last verse, which actually tells us that as humankind, as members of the family, we are a big family. We are citizens of the globe, if you can call them. We could be living in Singapore and in Pakistan or in the United States or in Malaysia or in Australia, but that is just one of our identities. Our larger identity, our bigger identity is that we are citizens of the globe. We are part of this mankind, this family which is called mankind, and in this particular family, the superiority of a person is not decided by anything else except how a good human being he is, how good he is as a human being. This is such a potent message. This is such a powerful message, I think, that it needs to be put across to all people, and to tell them that our first religion, if you allow me to say, that our first religion is humanity. Our first contact with each other is humanity. Our first interaction with each other is the fact that we are all human beings, and because we are all human beings, we share the same human values. Such is the potence of this message. Okay, let's now move on to the last part of our study session, the Quran 14 session, and this is another quiz that you will need to attempt, as we have been doing in the past few sessions. So please take a few minutes and tick mark what comes to you as your own choice, as you would imagine yourself or as you would do. And as I don't need to say that you have to be honest, because that is how you're going to assess yourselves. And remember, if you assess yourselves in a very impartial way, you'll get the chance to improve yourselves. So please start off. Remember, the quiz is called How Careful Are You in Your Conversation? Okay, your time begins now. Okay, so just let me give you the scheme of marking yourself. I think that all of you have finished by now. Okay, so it's question number 1. The first option has 0 marks, the second option has 2 marks, second option has 2 marks, and the last has 10 marks. So it's 0, 2, and 10. Question number 2. The first option has -5 marks, the second has 10 marks, and the third also has 10 marks. Question number 3. The first option has 0, the second has 2, and the third has 10 marks. Question number 4. The first option has 10 marks, the second has -5, and the third has a 0. Question number 5. The first has 0 marks, the second has 2 marks, the third has 8 marks, and the fourth has 10. Question number 6. Option number 1 has 10, option number 2 has 8, option number 3 has 2, and option number 4 has a 0. Question number 7. The first has -5 mark, the second has 0, the third has 2, and the fourth has 10. This was question number 7. Now moving on to question number 8. The first has 0, the second has 2, and the third has 10 marks. Question number 9. The first has -5, the second has a 0, the third has 8, and the fourth has 10. And the last question is question number 10. The first option has -10, the second has 0, the third has 8, and the fourth has 10. So remember, these marks are they are a general feedback on your current situation. They are not exactly very precise, but they are close to being precise, and therefore it would be good if you could just regard this to be a barometer of how you are vis-a-vis your conversation skills and your conversation vis-a-vis the good and bad conduct. Below 60 is if someone has scored below 60, of course they need to be more considerate and more attentive to some of these shortcomings. Maybe you'd like to revise some of the questions if you would like to improve them, that why is it that certain things are happening and they are beyond you. So that is a area in which all of us, if we've scored less than 60 marks, we need to pick up. So between 60 and 70 we have good. The category is called good, which means you're reasonably good. Between 70 and 80 is very good. Between 80 and 90 is excellent, and between 90 and 100 is exceptional, which means that you are an exceptional person. And remember, even if you're an exceptional person, this state of being an exceptional person is not going to stay with you forever unless you keep working on it very hard. So in order to maintain that high standard, lifelong struggle, it's not just a thing that happens and it stays there. It is always challenged. Don't be worried or don't be disappointed if you've not scored high, because you see, this is something which all of us need to work on. I include myself as well. All of us need to work upon, because this is something which is an everyday conduct, and scoring a little less should not be alarming as much as this should be, that if you're not trying hard enough to sort of overcome these barriers. So take some time out whenever you can after this class, assess the areas in which you would need improvement, and remember, it is only you yourself who can improve yourself. No one is going to come and do it for you. All that we can do is help you out and let you know the areas in which you need to work more, and the rest is up to you. And the purpose is that you become high achievers as human beings. The more high achievers you are, the more closer to God you will be, and the better you will fare in the hereafter. So our purpose is to become better human beings, and try to maintain a very high standard. And as we say, you have to aim high, always aim high. Don't settle for low. As we don't settle for low targets in our life, in our other affairs, we always settle for high targets. So set yourself high targets vis-a-vis becoming a good human being. I'm very sure, inshallah, all of you are much more capable. And as time goes along, all of you are so young, mashallah, you have a whole life to live. Just as you're giving time to your studies and to your sports and to other activities, give time to this aspect of your life as well, because it's going to help you in this world, and of course it's going to help you in the next as well. Thank you very much for being a very good and patient listeners here and participating wholeheartedly in this session. We'll be back inshallah once again next week with a new section from the Quran. So it's Khuda Hafiz from your teacher, and take care.